our 10th year of this program. And we're really excited to be able to offer this again. We just want to give also a big thank you to all the organizations and elected officials who helped get us this funding and continue it for the last 10 years. We ask that you also advocate and contact your elected officials and tell them about this program, how it's beneficial so we can continue supporting you and sustaining this funding for years to come. So the Communities of Color Nonprofit Stabilization Fund was established in 2014 to provide capacity building grants to build up organizational infrastructure, which we know is often not funded. We know before the pandemic and especially throughout the pandemic, many organizations like yourselves continue to provide essential services to communities. The demand for assistance was really high. Nonprofits really stepped up to provide these services. We know organizations grew. We know some were created to respond to community needs too. So with this funding, we're wanting to build up your infrastructure so you can plan for long-term sustainability. We provide tools to sustain that, to grow your organization, and then also provide spaces for networking too. You can go to the next slide. So just to go through the eligibility, we know some folks might have already received an award before, but some are new. So just some things to think about. Make sure you're registered with the city, registered with Passport HHS Accelerator. If you already have other city contracts from the city, you should be up to date in Passport. Make sure you're also registered with the state's Charities Bureau. And you need to have been a 501c3 for at least 2 years. And this is especially important. Like I said earlier, especially during COVID, we know that there were a lot of 501c3s that were established. And so in the past, we've definitely had some groups who have come to the briefings who are not yet at that 2 year mark, but then applied for funding later too. You have to be based in New York City. I think in the past, we've also had some groups upstate who were interested in this program and join these briefings. But in order to be eligible, you have to be based in New York City, and 75% of the people you serve, they also need to be in New York City because this is funded by City Council. You also need to be a direct services organization. You need to serve communities with more than 51% or more people of color. You have done outreach as well to communities of color. And then also an update from the previous years is the organizational budget. So there's been a change in that. It was previously 150,000 to 2 million, but this year we've received approval to increase that range. So to qualify, you need to have an org budget between 150,000 to 3 million. We know we were able to get it increased because we know that investment in small and mid-sized organizations who again stepped up during COVID is really necessary to continue to serve communities that are still dealing with the aftermath of the pandemic, and wanted to allow for a greater number of organizations to build their capacity to continue to provide these services. And then regarding your budget, we've gotten some questions on which budget you're referring to, if this is your current budget, but it's the budget that's on your Form 990, and that's the budget that we're going to be using to determine eligibility. But if you have any specific questions about that, you can contact the administrating organization that you're applying to. For eligibility too, we want to make sure that you're committed to the equal employment opportunities, you're committed and have the capacity to provide culturally competent services. And then we know a lot of groups do work with and they use fiscal sponsors, but for this funding, you won't be eligible. We have had some groups in the past who have tried to move on from fiscal sponsors to bring their financial operations in-house to access this funding too. You can go to the next slide. So in terms of the different types of capacity building projects, you have management information systems design and development, you have financial management and planning, evaluation outcomes and system development, leadership development, new program planning and development, strategy and organizational development, and collaboration and strategic alliances. So in the past, this has looked like, maybe setting up financial systems. Some orgs have done succession planning too. Just want to emphasize this funding opportunity is for capacity building projects and not program implementation. So just keeping that in mind. And so if you've applied in the past and you've received funding, you can't apply for a project that you've already received funding for. So for example, if you got funding in the past for leadership development and you have a totally different project, but it falls under leadership development, that project isn't going to be eligible for this funding. It has to be an entirely new project type that you haven't received funding for. Um, And then you can request up to 35,000 if your organizational budget is between 150,000 to 500,000, and you can request up to 45,000 if your organization budget is between 500,000 and $1 to 3.5 million. You can move to the next slide. And then to access the applications, everything is online. So you can go to the website, so ccnsffund.org/apply, and make sure you only submit an application to one partner only. We previously had paper submissions, but we're no longer doing that. Everything's online.
So next we have the city council vetting process. The city council vetting process consists of the Lexis Comprehensive Business Report Search, related entities, principals, tax warrants, liens, workers' compensation violations, and addresses. Okay, so when the city council looks at your organization, they look for these things. Please look for any negative or anything. Go online, check your organization, make sure you don't have any liens, tax warrants, principals, or whatever, because sometimes when we send your name in as an awardee, city council sends it back to us and says, where there's a lien against this organization. So make sure you do that before you apply. Next, Lexis News article search, searching for any negative news about your organization. The IRS database search, your tax exempt status. The New York State Department of State Corporations database, incorporation status. The New York State Tax Warrant Notice database, okay? The New York City Department of Buildings, location and occupancy status. The New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene for group child care services, daycare center inspections. All of these things will be checked. Review of use of funds to ensure that monies are not used in a prohibited manner, because we do come across organizations that are not honest and they don't use the funds for what they're supposed to use them for. Make sure you have your conflict of interest forms, your charity's exemption if applicable, and authorization forms review. Next slide. Okay, hold on. City council vetting process for consultants. I'm getting a lot of emails about consultants. Do they have to be registered with the state attorney general's office? Just different things. This is the vetting process. The same thing as your organization. Lexis Comprehensive Business Report Search, related entities, principals, tax warrants, liens, workers' compensation violations, and addresses. Lexis News article search for negative news about your consultant. Registration with the State Attorney General's office. Google and social media, and conflict of interest forms. Okay. Budget.
So budgets. Budget is really important for your application submission, as it's essential to provide a budget that matches the award caps. So which are again 35,000 max if your budget is up to 500,000, and anything above 500,000 to 3.5 million, you have a max request of 45,000. So for salary expenses, they're capped at 30% of what you're requesting, which includes part-time and full-time employees. Your fringe benefits are capped 15% of that salary line. So it will be 15% of what is allocated of the total salary expenses and not the entire request. So there are two different scenarios of how you could include staff under this initiative, is either delivering training or professional developments, Or the second scenario is that your staff is participating in trainings and other staff has to cover, so there won't be a disruption of services. So again, your consultants are capped at 60%, and then hardware and software are capped at 30%. And this initiative does not really allow expenses towards capital or admin. Next slide, please. So this is a sample breakdown of a 35,000 requests using the caps provided. So those with using those three main lines. So for example, salaries capped at 35,000, that's the 10,500 you see. Then we have the fringe, which is capped at 15%, which is the 15% of the 10,500. And then the consultants are capped at 60%, and the remaining allocated is for OTPS. Next slide, please. So this is a sample budget. So the sample budget provides really an overview of what we ask in detail. And this is great because it really provides like insight of each category. Like for example, for fringe, what is fringe exactly? And also a quick reminder for fringe, for your organization, if you're providing fringe, you need to provide supporting documentation. Then you have consultants. It provides a breakdown of what we exactly define of what is a consultant, which is like an external service or an expertise that does not exist within your organization. And then for OTPS, there are certain examples that are like admission fees, workshops, different software and equipment. So yeah, that's the sample budget. Next slide, please. And then, yeah, moving forward, the sample budget, this is essentially what we want it to look like. We want to provide as much detail as possible, such as who you're hiring, what is the position title, how much are you allocating for? And for example, if there's within the position title, if there's multiple people, you submit lines for those multiple positions. It follows suits for the fringe benefits, also providing that supporting documentation. And for consultants, I do want to note for consultants, if you don't know exactly the name of the consultant, you could submit the documentation later, but it may cause a delay as DYCD has its own vetting process. What else? For OTPS, you want to provide as much detail as possible of what exactly you're allocating the money for, just to basically paint a bigger picture, making sure that the numbers really match the narrative. So next slide, please.
Okay. Take note, consultants. The consultant is chosen with the following considerations. Consultants cannot be existing staff or a current, former intern or family relative of staff or board members. Consultants cannot have an email address issued by your organization. Consultant has been properly interviewed and references checked. Budget allocation for a for-profit and nonprofit consultant is capped at 60% of the total award. So for example, if you're applying for a $35,000 grant, your consultant budget is capped at $21,000. If you're applying for a grant of $45,000, your consultant cap is $27,000. Now, you don't necessarily have to use the entire amount for consultants. All proposed consultants must submit current documentation because they will be vetted in the current year. Okay? Okay. When you're submitting your proposals, please attach the following documents for consultants. Now, if you haven't chose a consultant for when you apply or at your in your application, don't worry about it because you're going to have to send it in at a later time. But it would be great if you would choose your consultants at the time you send in your application. So the following things are necessary. a resume, a EIN, and social security number. Some of your consultants have a common name, so they have to have these numbers to identify them. Contact information, conflict of interest disclosure form. They must send in a conflict of interest form. Client list, a description of consultant appropriateness rationale for choosing the consultant. Next slide.
Thank you very much, Yvonne, and good morning again, folks. So yes, this is how our timeline is looking at the moment. So definitely the most important date that you need to mark on your calendar, put on your widget, send a reminder to, just so that you're keeping on top of things, is the application due date, which is November 17th, which is basically 9 days from now, right around the corner. So please make sure that if you are applying, to submit your application by November 17th at 5 p.m. Applications received after the deadline will be deemed ineligible. So what happens from there? So the next step is that your application will be reviewed by our allocation committee panel. And so this is with the specific partners, the administering partners, CACF, New York Urban League, and Hispanic Federation. And the allocation committee panel, it consists of folks who have experience working in nonprofit or philanthropy. So they will be the ones who will review and evaluate your applications. And then from there will be a convening, which is a one-day meeting where we will discuss the applications and those and the decisions that have been made. And then from there, we will have that list to be sent over to DYCD for the vetting process, as mentioned earlier in their slides. So for both the awardees and the consultants to be vetted by DYCD, that will take place. Again, there isn't a specific date, but usually after the allocation panel meets around December, that's when we will send the list over to DYCD for vetting. Just to give a heads up to folks that this is one where it's a bit of waiting, but once we get an update from DYCD and all things are a go, then from there we will proceed with reaching out with decision status applications, and then also some additional information for those that we will be moving forward with. So for those that we will move forward with, sometime between January or February, we will host an orientation. This is a chance to explain more clearly about CCNSF and also offer additional information that wouldn't be mentioned in this briefing, but would be more suitable for the orientation. From there, awardees are required to submit an interim report, which would be due sometime in April. And we will be reaching out to folks early on with templates and with instructions on how to properly note and document the program expense claims report, to provide supporting documents to reflect the program expense claims report, and then an interim narrative report, which basically highlights the progress of the project, the progress of the budget spending, and just any immediate challenges or concerns that we need to be aware of. From there, another important date to mark, and this is again for those that we will move forward with, making sure that both the project completion and the budget spending are completely done by June 30th. Anything after June 30th will not be accepted. So once you've completed the project and the budget spending, then the final report will be due in July. And just like the interim report, the final report, it covers, again, the program expense claims report. It covers providing supporting documents that reflect the final program expense claims report. And of course, a final narrative report, which, again, similar to the interim narrative report, again, just highlighting progress of the project and budget spending and just anything else we need to know. But more importantly, just making sure that this experience has been a fruitful and meaningful one. Lastly, again, we don't have anything set on this one. We're still in the very, very early phases, but just to give a heads up to folks, as per CCNSF award stipulations, awardees are required to attend at minimum 3 capacity building trainings. But in addition, we also extend this to all applicants. But we offer capacity building training sessions. We would normally send a list around late winter, early spring of 2024, once the specific trainings have been finalized. These will be offered by all the NSF partners, and the topics range on a variety of capacity building areas. In addition, we acknowledge everyone has very busy schedules and may not be able to make the capacity building trainings we offer, but DYCD also offers capacity building trainings year-round. So feel free to also check that out if that's more convenient for you. But again, we will keep folks updated once we have a finalized training session schedule available, and one that you can share within your network. So in terms of resources, the first and foremost, the CCNSF website continues to be updated constantly. So please continue to refer and navigate the CCNSF website for any immediate questions, thoughts, ideas, etc. that as you're working on the application and continuing to familiarize yourself more with CCNSF, please continue to check the website. It's constantly updated, and the recordings will be posted, including today's recording, that will also be available on the website that you can share amongst your networks. In addition to consistently updating the website, we're also consistently updating the FAQs, especially with this grant cycle round, where the organizational budget cap is now at 3.5 million. So definitely we hope this encourages more organizations to apply. Also on the website, you can find an updated consultant list. So we acknowledge folks are in the process of searching for a consultant, and again, the updated consultant list provides those details. You can reach out to the administrative partner that you plan to apply to if you have any additional questions as you're reviewing the consultant list. And finally, we also have the budget samples available. So again, just something to help you in the process as you're working on your application. And quite fitting, as I mentioned, who to contact. So this is our updated contact info for each of the partners that you can reach out to if you have any questions, any concerns, any thoughts. After I share this slide deck, I will drop the contact info in the chat box. But again, we know that this is crunch time. I mean, we're roughly 9 days away until the application deadline, but we are here for you, and we want to make sure that you're able to submit a fully completed application. And again, we are happy to help in every way possible. So please don't be afraid to reach out to us with any questions or thoughts. Don't save it to the last minute, though. I want you to definitely want to recommend folks reach out to us as early as possible. And again, we're here to help. And with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing the slide deck, and I'll turn it over I'll turn it over to Ambrosia for questions.
All right, thanks folks for bearing with us throughout that presentation. And we have reached the section that everyone looks forward to, which is questions. So I've been keeping an eye on the chat. So we'll just start at the very first question that was asked about, will the slide deck be sent out to participants? The slide deck will not be sent out to participants. However, we've recorded every community briefing. Our first two are currently on the CCNSF website that you can refer to. This one, once we've uploaded it and we finished, that will be uploaded to the website as well. And everything that we reviewed in this presentation is currently on the website. So you'll have access to all of those resources through the CCNSF website, which I put in the chat previously, but we can put it in again for folks to reference. So the next question is, are you looking at revenue or expenses on the 990? So the specific requirements around the budget is your operating budget has to be under 3.5 million, and that's a change this year. It was actually increased, which we're really pleased about. So the answer to this question about whether we're looking at revenue and expenses for the 990, we're looking at both. Your budget just has to be under 3.5 million. If you have any additional questions around budget stuff, you can reach out to the participating organization or the partner that you're submitting your application to with additional clarification. And that might be helpful for flagging any budget questions you might have with additional context, but we're looking at both. Cameron asks, to add to Catherine's question, is this for past, current, or future fiscal years? Great question. So we typically ask you to submit your 990 and audited financial statements. I know there's another question about audited financial statements, so stay with me on this one for now. The most recent one you have. So I know that 11/15 is a big deadline for everyone. So I would say the documents that you're using for that 11/15 deadline is what you can submit to us. And that's typically the most recent past fiscal year. I hope that answered your question. And again, as we move through these, if any other questions come up as we answer, just add them to the chat. Yeah, thanks, Francis, for adding. November 17th is the deadline for the CCNSF fund. November 15th is a tax deadline. So that's what we're specifically talking about. So next question, are consultants mandatory? Again, really good question. Consultants aren't mandatory. However, we want to specifically flag that this is a capacity building fund that folks are expected to use to build some sort of internal system, internal practice, something that makes your organization operate better. And the, I guess, kind of assumption around that is like, you'll need to bring in folks to improve whatever system, whatever process, whatever thing you're looking to do, which is why we talk about consultants a lot. The idea behind that is that there isn't currently capacity on staff to do that. So you're looking for specific subject matter experts. Again, consultants not mandatory, and your proposal will be very based on the needs of your organization. I think in one of our last community briefings, we mentioned that we've been running this fund for 10 years now. This is our 10th year, which is really exciting. And there have been maybe 2 proposals that have been funded through CCNSF without a consultant. So it's possible, but you'd have to have a really compelling reason not to have one within your application. So the next question is from Janelle. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And the question is, who counts as a consultant? So we went over this a little bit in the presentation. We went over what consultants cannot be. So I'm gonna go ahead and kind of review that again. But a consultant can be somebody who's working, again, with you to build the capacity of your organization. They cannot be existing staff. They cannot be current or former interns. They cannot be family members. And and they cannot be board members. And one thing that's really important to flag is they cannot have an email address associated with your organization. So they just can't be part of your organization already. If you're working with an external consultant right now, you can continue to work with them under CCNSF for that project, but it just can't be somebody working for your organization, a family member, a friend, or a board member. I hope that was useful. Again, if you need clarification, drop it again in the chat. The next question is again from Catherine, who writes, the application requires audited financial statements, which the state doesn't ask nonprofits to do if you have revenue below 1 million. So for most of us smaller organizations, we don't have an audit. Can we submit CPA reviewed financials or are we ineligible? Good question, Catherine. For folks who are sort of newer to the nonprofit realm, there's different levels and different financial standards based on your budget. So as Catherine mentioned, folks under 1 million aren't required to have an audited financial statement. We can accept anything that's required for your budget. So the minimum is 150K. You have to have at least that much. But whatever financial statements that are required for your organization, we will submit that. Again, if that's your plan and if that's what you're going to submit, I would highly suggest reaching out to the partner that you are planning to apply to, and you have all of our contact information, just to give it a flag. Anna asks, if not using a consultant, can a proposed budget be up to 55% OTPS? So there is no cap on OTPS except for that 30% on software and equipment. So yes. The next question is, can we apply with more than one consultant in our proposal?
Yes.
The answer to that is yes, you can apply with more than one consultant in your proposal. Something to flag is both consultants have to be vetted. Every consultant that you work with has to be vetted by DYCD. And the total consultants have to stay within the consultant cap. Do the consultants have to be registered with the State Attorney General's office? The answer to that is no, I believe. Unless any partners want to correct me. But the answer to that is no. What we do need for consultants is that list in the presentation around what we need to send for vetting. As long as your folks have that and you can submit that, you're good to go with your consultant and don't have an email address associated with your organization. The next question from Mara is, are venue costs for training or strategy meetings a viable expense? Yes, venue costs for a training or strategy meetings are definitely a viable expense. Just make sure you talk about it in your proposal and relate your project to your budget and why you're needing these costs. But definitely, yes. Next question, should an organization include the consultant that helps write the grant application or only consultants that work on programmatic work? It's a really great question. And the way that I would answer that is if for whatever reason that consultant is related to your project, you can include it, but if it's not, I would suggest you don't. So I just want to make sure that everything is related to the project you propose. So if for some reason the consultant that helps write the grant proposal is gonna work on this project you're proposing to do with the funds, you can include them. I think that's a great idea. If they're just helping you write the application but have no relation to what you're planning to do with the money, I would say probably not the best argument for including them. Next question. I'm sure that it's too late for this cycle, but for future cycles, is CCNSF open to looking at proposals prior to submission for feedback? So the answer to that, I think, is no. We are not open to looking at full proposals for feedback before you submit them. What we are open to is answering clarifying questions about the RFP, what projects, what the project areas are, any clarifying questions about the budget, things like that. But reviewing an entire proposal, we're not open to, because it's a selection process, and that kind of goes against the election if folks are getting feedback on their entire proposal before it's submitted. Partners, chime in if you have any additional things to that. And give me a second to back up. I'm going to look at the chats for additional questions. So I see, can the consultant be a current or former board member? They cannot be a current board member. They might be able to be a former board member. They cannot. They might be able to be a former board member if they're not currently working with your organization. So they can't be with your organization right now. Amira asks, if you have been awarded previously, does that limit your potential for being awarded again? How many times is the limit, if any? That's a really great question. CCNSF, you can get CCNSF awards multiple years. It doesn't limit your potential for being awarded again. Like the fact that you received an award, it doesn't limit you from getting another award. However, you can't apply for the same project more than once. So I think by proxy, the limit is how many projects we have. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So if you apply for every single capacity building project, that's 7 awards. And because you cannot apply more than once to any project type, that is your limit. Malika asks, if your budget is slightly above the 3 million max, will any special exceptions be made? I'm so sorry to say no. There will not be any exceptions. Specifically around this maximum, it took us a very long time to convince City Council to raise it to this max, and they're going to be pretty eagle-eyed on that max amount. So there will unfortunately be not be any exceptions around the cap.
Right.
Lauren asks, if your organization has a national presence, but all staff and many annual programs are NYC based, is this org eligible? How do you define the 75% NYC residents? And then there's a follow-up on how do you find direct service organization? So that's a great question, Lauren. If your organization has a national presence and you're using that EIN of the entire national organization, the eligibility is that every single, I guess, all of the folks that you serve within that organization, 50%, over 50% have to be New York City residents. Oh, sorry, 75% have to be New York City residents. So keep that in mind in terms of eligibility. It's like the total population you're served. So if you have a national presence, you're working across the entire nation. So that we're talking about the total population of the folks that you work with, 75% have to be from New York City. And that could be true for your organization. For example, if you primarily work in New York City and serve a couple other states, it could still be that. But that's the cap. It could be eligible, but think of it in those terms. Also, how do we define direct service organization? We don't have a specific definition around direct service organization, but your organization should be providing services directly to community members. And it could be a variety of services, but you should be working directly and interfacing directly with the community and the people that you serve. I think we can give examples of organizations that are not defined as direct services. For example, think tanks that don't necessarily provide a specific service to a community, that wouldn't necessarily be eligible. So I hope that answered that question. If you have more nuanced questions or want more detail, just put it in the chat again. Stephanie asked, did you mention that 2 proposals have been funded without including consultants? Just wanted to confirm. Thank you. Yes, but that's like out of the 10-year history of CCNSF. So There have been proposals funded without consultants, but it's quite rare, but it has happened. Mara asks, how many total awards will be given? That's a really great question. And we don't have an answer for you right now. From CCNSF's, or sorry, from CACF side, our awards vary based on our application pool. So they're different from year to year, and they also depend on DYCD vetting. So we could want to submit a number of organizations, and some might not pass that vetting. So it's hard to give an example of how many total awards will be given on our side. We just need to see what comes in. I don't know if the other partners want to talk about their specific award amounts, but for us, we can't really give.
For New York Urban League, we basically give anywhere from our average amount is 28 awards. That's our average.
Right, and I think CCNSF has been like around the 15 area, but again, that's really dependent on the applications we get in.
Right.
Joe asks, hi Joe, just to clarify, OTPS was always capped at 30% of the grant amount. It was just mentioned OTPS can now be 60% of the grant. Is that correct? So I'm gonna correct you a little bit, Joe. OTPS is not capped at 30. Specifically, software expenses and computer hardware is capped at 30, which is part of OTPS, but not all of OTPS. That's what's capped at 30. And what's capped at 60 is consultants. So OTPS itself doesn't have a cap. Software expenses and computer hardware does, and that's at 30% cap. And the 60% cap is the consultants. Again, the budget caps and what's required out of the budget is on the CCNSF website. So as you're developing your proposal, your budget, just make sure you're using that as a reference. Anna asks, our ED is transitioning out of the organization next year. How can this impact our proposal? That's a really interesting question. If you have, I would say, as you're putting together your proposal, addressing that specific question and making sure that reviewers know that you have a contingency plan, know that you have a plan for this transition and are fully aware of it. I would say integrating that in your proposal will make it stronger and will make your project more viable for funding. I hope that is helpful, but again, if you have more questions around that, put them in the chat. I don't think a transition will necessarily like exclude you from funding, but submitting a proposal with a plan will make it stronger. Cameron asks, just want to double check on the consultant registration question. Is a consultant registered outside of New York eligible for inclusion? Yes, you can work with consultants outside of New York, as long as your consultant has a strong relation to your project, and we understand why you're using the consultant you are. Totally fine for it to be outside of New York. You just have to make sure you send us all of those requirements around consultants. Janelle asks, can you talk more about the salary percentages and scenarios in the budget slide? Janelle, can you come up, and I'm sorry if I'm getting your name wrong, can you come off mute and give a little bit more context around your question?
Sure. Yeah, you talked a bit about percentages that can be allocated to salaries and different scenarios for that, but it was really quick, so I just didn't really get the full picture there.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So the cap around salaries is that salary expenses may not exceed 30% of your project's awarded budget. And you can put salaries on this budget if specifically they relate to existing staff that are delivering a training or professional development for other staff to enhance the capacity of the nonprofit CBO, and is currently not compensated for this training. or existing staff are participating in training and other existing staff have to cover programs so there is no disruption to services. So because this is capacity building, those salaries are really centered around that capacity building. Again, related to what you're thinking, but they have to be directly involved in the project that you are proposing. So they can be folks that are participating in this training, and if you need coverage for those folks in that training, you can put those staff on there. They can also be giving a specific training and they can't be compensated for that. Did that help? And I hope that was useful. It's really hard to give like an example. Just because all of your projects are different, but I guess I think an example can be if you're doing, I don't know, if you're focusing on like a CRM development and there's specific staff that need to be part of that CRM development, for example, your data staff, et cetera, they can be on there because they're participating in it. And if for whatever reason, during the time that they're participating in this project, you need folks to backfill their position, you can also include that staff. It just has to be everybody related to the implementation of this project. I hope that was clear, but if not, throw it in the chat. Mason asks, is there somewhere we can access the previously recorded training sessions? Yes, Mason. It's on the CCNSF website. And let me see, can one of the partners drop in that website just so it's re-upped in the chat? I think we did it earlier, but as you go through this process, continuously refer to the CCNSF website because all of this information is there. Lila asks, is there somewhere we can view past awarded projects with other organizations? Unfortunately, no. We don't make that information available. Just because these types of projects are really specific to your organization and we want you to be really reflective about the needs. So there isn't anywhere where we have past awarded projects or applications for review. Mara asks, are we committed to using the consultant we mentioned in our application? Would mentioning the consultants we are vetting be appropriate? No, you're not required to use the consultant that you mentioned in your application. If you want to change consultants, like if you get awarded and you want to change consultants, for some reason you found somebody more appropriate, you can definitely change. I do have to always flag that every single consultant needs to be vetted by DYCD. So totally fine to change, but you'd have to send us all of that information. We'd have to submit it to DYCD again for vetting. I'm sorry, Leela. Hopefully that's better. But I think we've come to the end of questions in the chat. Does anybody have any more? Feel free to put it in the chat, or if you want, you can come off mute and ask them.
I have a follow-up to the staff budget question.
What's up?
For the training you were talking about, can we include the staff that are attending the training, their salaries as well?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, you can include existing staff that are participating in the training. Are there projected grant disbursement dates if awarded? This question comes from Cameron. So if awarded, there are a couple of disbursement dates. You'll get a 25% advance on your total award amount. That'll be your first payment. Then you have an optional interim payment toward the middle of the contract year. And then you have the final award in April. So that's the length of, there's a couple of different disbursement dates if you choose to do it. I will flag that these funds are reimbursable. So the only upfront disbursement you'll get is that 25% advance on your award. The rest of them are all reimbursements. So you'll have to prove that you spent those funds and then we'll reimburse you for it with additional supporting documentation and all that fun stuff. It's still government funding, so we're still beholden by government funding rules. Brenda asks, what documents do we need to submit for consultants?
There,
And yeah, take it, Yvonne.
okay, there's a list. Hold on one second. For consultants, you need a resume, EIN, social security number. Just make sure that number, the social security number, EIN number is there. Contact information, conflict of interest form, a client list, and a description of the consultant appropriateness, rationale for choosing the consultant. That's what you need.
Thanks. And all of that is listed on the website.
The website.
So you can refer to that as you're going through as well and collecting these documents for your consultants.
And it's also in the application.
And it's also in the application. We try to put all the information everywhere. Is there a template or application format that is available on the website? So there isn't a template, but all of the applications are available on the website. So once you navigate there and you go to the application section, you'll see 3 different buttons, one for CACF, one for New York Urban League, and one for Hispanic Federation. You'll just click on whichever organization you're applying to, and it'll take you directly to that organization's application. All the applications are exactly the same. Amy asks, is there a list of the application questions? The application doesn't let you see the next set of questions until you fill out the current page. I don't think, and partners correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's a list of application questions, but reach out to the partner that you're applying for, and I think they can, applying to, I'm sorry, and they can help you out with that and give you a list of questions. Gabriel asks, for consultants, assuming that all money is spent before the grant deadline, could some of the services paid for extend beyond the project deadline? No. It's a hard deadline. Yeah. I'm sorry. It's city council dollars. The fiscal year ends on June 30th. So that's a pretty hard non-extendable one. Your project and everything you said you say and project to do within your project needs to end by then. Mara asks, can you apply to more than one partner on this call? Unfortunately, you can't, and that will actually get you disqualified. So don't submit to more than one of us. Right, any other questions? You have about 2 minutes to get them in there in this group forum, but the partners and your contacts are always open. We'll be eagle-eyed on our inboxes until November 17th. We promise you that. Okay. Thank you again, everybody, for attending. We really appreciate this. We've had some amazing questions across all of the community briefings, and we're really thankful for your partnership and your participation. Again, if anything comes up as you develop your applications, your budget, you think of your consultant, reach out to the partners, and we're there to support you throughout this entire process. So highly encourage you. And if you're a new organization, welcome. We're really excited to get new orgs, especially with the increase in this budget. So I'm gonna leave some space for my partners if you want to jump in and say any last words before we close out this meeting. All right. So again, thank you. This is our final community briefing, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.